So you guys probably have known by now, I am pretty much a big fan of Nintendo. Some of the greatest video games of all time happen to come from Nintendo or were distributed by Nintendo. Nintendo's been a big part of my childhood, and for some of y'all, or the majority of people who grew up in video games, the big three in our timelines are Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft. Personally, for me, I grew up with Nintendo and Sony. With Sony with the PlayStation family, and then for Nintendo, it was the Game Boy Color, it was the Game Boy Advance, the DS, the 3DS, the Wii, and the Switch, which is the current generation that we're on with Nintendo right now. However, over the years, I've noticed very questionable decision making in regards to Nintendo's goals, whether it's for the consumer, whether it's for the financial and economic aspect, whether it's Nintendo's way of saying, hey, we're trying to adjust to the economic market that the consumer and the businesses are going through right now, especially since we are still in a pandemic, albeit it's almost been 2 years since the pandemic started. The biggest question, and you'll probably see it in today's video title, is the question of, is Nintendo really practicing anti-consumerism? Now, if you guys don't know what anti-consumerism is, it's essentially the private actions of a company that want to gain pursuit for financial and economic benefits at the expense of public welfare, safety, environmental. Obviously, in Nintendo's situation, it's going to be mostly the consumer base, unless there's some really crazy stuff going on in the background that we personally do not know. So let's get started. So I guess the biggest argument that I've seen from the Nintendo fan base is the piracy slash ROM controversy that Nintendo has definitely put their foot through the door with this one. As you guys are well aware, piracy emulation has a really controversial relationship with Nintendo. The fans somehow, some way, arguably make the best versions of a game that Nintendo already has made or has the PI rights to, the intellectual property. If you guys don't know what I said PI, it should be IP. Intellectual property. Emulation. There's been plenty of emulators out there. Now, why is this such a controversial topic? Well, for one, there are some legacy games that are really hard to come by, and Nintendo has refused for some reason. They either are just oblivious of the situation, or they just want to protect their legacy content some way. But I feel like if you want to understand the glory of Nintendo back in the days, you gotta understand that there are some games out there that are just hard to come by nowadays, unless you have access to an emulator, unless you have access to a ROM, unless you want to make a game look even cooler. There are certain mods that allow you to have access to skins, some interesting designs for a game that already exists. Nintendo doesn't give a damn about that. Why is that? Well, Nintendo has been pretty famous for the, going targeting, not going just after people dare, who dare try to make ROMs, try to alter their games. They go after these people, and there have been lawsuits in regards to ROM websites that use the basis of a Nintendo game and alter them in a way that perhaps there's new mods, there's new quote unquote content on a already existing game. Me personally, in my experience, the only time I ever used the ROMs were for older Pokemon games, because honestly, I say if I want to play Emerald, yes, I own a copy of Emerald. The problem is I don't own a Game Boy Advance SP anymore, because first of all, it's an outdated system. It's a great one nonetheless, don't get me wrong, but it's hard to play a full functioning game of Emerald without emulation. Now, obviously, we've seen a lot of stuff on YouTube called Nuzlocks, or a lot of stuff that does randomizers. In that case, that involves a mod. Nintendo hates that. But it seems like to me that's kind of weird because the consumer fan base loves this kind of stuff. The one of the interesting quotes that I've seen going around the community is, if you're pirating a Nintendo game, you're doing the right thing, which is very odd because in other circumstances it is completely not just wrong, but it's also illegal, and there are legality issues when it comes to piracy, modding, emulating. But in Nintendo's situation, it's just so weird that they do not. It's as if, this is all just speculation, just opinion. None of this is facts from what I'm gonna say. But it seems to me like Nintendo doesn't want their brand to be tarnished by anyone nor anything. It's just such a strange thing to do. I feel like if you're modding a game that makes the game even better than what Nintendo brings out, Nintendo thinks of it as, hey, what the hell? This is our game. What are you doing? Who cares if you're making it good? Who cares if you're making it worse? This is our game. You cannot do anything to it, and if you do, we're going to go after you and we're going to sue you. There have been plenty of fan games that have been taken down by Nintendo because, they want to protect their IPs. They want to protect the games that essentially make money. But at the same time, these games don't exist anymore. So why is it a problem for them? From a business standpoint, I guess I understand why they want to protect their games because it is their intellectual property and they want to do whatever they want to do with it. But at the same time, if you're not providing full access to these games, particularly legacy games, for everyone to enjoy, that seems to be the very essence of, this can go either right or wrong. And I feel like in that situation, there isn't really a true answer. Unless we strictly know Nintendo's motivation behind such controversy with ROMs, pirating, and emulators, it's hard to explain. Because, like I said, you can either go this way or that way. The arguments on both sides can honestly be really good and persuasive, but who knows. Another thing I wanted to talk about is Virtual Console, and that kind of ties into the previous point that I was making of protecting legacy games. Nintendo, there's no way I'm going to spend $50 on a Nintendo subscription online just to have access to games that are supposedly the GOAT games, like for example Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, which just recently got revealed, and they're half-assed products. Yes, $50 a year, it's whatever to me, honestly. For some people it's not, because the majority of the fan base are kids. Kids love Nintendo. Kids love their games. Kids love their Nintendo Switch. But if you're really gonna provide us something that we can enjoy, at least do your very best to not only preserve these games, to not only make them available, but to make them functioning. I've seen a lot of videos from a lot of YouTubers where they're showcasing like an Ocarina of Time example, and unbelievably there's stutters, there's glitches, there's some sort of weird stuff happening in these games, and it's like, really? Are you expecting us to pay this amount of money? Granted, this money can be small or big, depending on who it is, depending on who's the consumer, and you're giving us this kind of product? Now, the only reason why I'm bringing this up is because from this recent direct that Mario Kart 8 DLC is going to be happening too. Animal Crossing already got its DLC in the NSO as well, or it could be bought separately for whatever amount of money. Nintendo, if you're trying to push something, if you're trying to push a product, the least you can do is make that product presentable. Do I think the NSO is worth $50 or more? Absolutely not. I personally don't think so. Now, granted, we have Sony that pays an X amount of money, but at least they give us games that are presentable, they're functioning, and overall they're great products to get. The whole point of legacy games is not just preservation, but rather these games were an important part of our childhood. When these games came out, they were breathtaking. The first time anyone has booted up Ocarina of Time, the first time anyone has booted up Super Mario 64, Majora's Masks, Donkey Kong Country, it was an incredible experience. Nowadays, if you want to play for the first time, you can't have access to these games on the original consoles because one, the games are not being produced no more. Two, the consoles are being produced no more. You got to go buy it on the NSO. But the NSO isn't a very desirable product right now because of, again, functionality and presentation. So I think Nintendo, what they can possibly do is make a suitable virtual console. Hey, they were able to do it with the 3DS. They were able to do it with the Wii U. Why is the Nintendo Switch the exception? Now think about it. Think about this. What if I told you that the Nintendo Switch kickstarted off with a virtual console of the Game Boy Advance and GameCube? That is the very first thing that they did on Nintendo Switch. Imagine if they did that. And the games are preserved 100%. Sure, you can argue that the NSO is a emulator, which is funny enough. That's the one thing they're trying to fight against. But it's an emulator that works, an emulator that's functional. Can you imagine that I get to play Emerald on my Nintendo Switch, and I'm able to transfer Pokemon from there to home and then to Sword and Shield or Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl? Can you imagine that? But for some reason, the Nintendo Switch is the exception. Now, is there something going on behind the scenes in Nintendo? Sure, there might be, but I feel like we're about to approach 5 years with the Nintendo Switch. I do think it might be a lazy excuse of saying, "Hey, we don't want to put all these games out there for everybody because we want to keep our legacy intact," or they want to put a price tag on everything so we can let the consumers buy until they're not functioning anymore. And that leads into the other topic of limited releases of games. The biggest controversy that I've seen recently was with the Super Mario 3D All-Stars, in which, in celebrating Mario's 35th anniversary, they released pretty much a physical and a digital version of Super Mario 3D All-Stars, which consisted of Super Mario 64, Super Mario Sunshine, and Super Mario Galaxy, the first game. Arguably some of the best games in the Mario franchise, if not all-time Nintendo, and arguably one of the best games of all time. There's an argument that can be made for there. But I feel like the fact that they limited the amount to the public is very interesting, because that kind of creates a artificial demand. If you limit your own product and there's a greater demand, you're artificially creating something that's called an inflated third market. Now, what I mean by that, let's say, for example, there's 3 million games being sold. There's 6 million people. Of course, not everyone's going to buy one, but if you say, hey, this is going to be a limited product, and certain people buy the product, but you still have a good amount of product left, guess what happens? Scalping happens. Artificial increases in the third-party market happens. For example, when I went on eBay, as soon as within the week that Super Mario 3D All-Stars came out, the game was going for $80-$100 on eBay because Nintendo said, hey, this game is only going to be out for an X amount of time, and after a certain amount of time, it's not going to be in the eShop anymore. It's not going to be sold in stores anymore, which is kind of a lie, because I still to this day can find physical copies of 3D All-Stars in, Best Buy or Target. I've seen them. So that's kind of a false statement. But Nintendo loves to create an artificial supply and demand market in which they want to control the fan base. They want to control the business and financial aspects of the consumers. Make them think that a limited release means that you have to buy the game. Otherwise, you're going to suffer from a third market inflation. And you can see this a lot with games, or even not even just games, products that are limited releases. For example, sneakers, high-end clothing products, and cars to a certain extent. Of course, again, we are in a pandemic, and those circumstances may alter. But the main focal point of what I'm trying to say is Nintendo wants to control their economic market, regardless of what the consumer wants. So that's pretty much there. The other issue that I have with Nintendo, or it seems like a lot of people have issues with Nintendo, is are they really behind on the times? Now, what I mean by that is, don't get me wrong, the Nintendo Switch is a great device. Nintendo strives for innovation, in which they have succeeded with the creation of the DS, with the creation of the Wii U, and with the ultimate creation that is the Nintendo Switch. But to say the Nintendo Switch is the perfect device, the perfect video gaming console, is a bit of a reach. Because again, we are approaching the 5th birthday of the Nintendo Switch. And we have yet to see a Nintendo Switch version in which there's better processing power, better graphics fidelity, and to a certain extent, overall better quality of an archaic system. Technology advances every year at a very rapid rate. But to see the Nintendo Switch, and this is probably not the best argument, and to compare it to the new Xbox or the new PS5, you'll see the Nintendo Switch is very behind a lot of things. Now there have been great games on Nintendo Switch. Super Mario Odyssey. We've had Breath of the Wild. We've had Animal Crossing. Those games are the gold standards of what games should be, regardless of what console they are. But what happens if that console cannot support the game's high fidelity, their high performance? I feel like instead of the Nintendo Switch OLED, there should have been more. Now, of course, there might be limited resources. There is a chip shortage going on right now. But I feel like it's time for Nintendo Switch to have a better upgrade. It's time for Nintendo Switch to have a better product that more people can enjoy. Instead of giving us different versions of the same base model, give us something of an improvement that is worth our while. Something that lets us enhance our gaming experience. Something that enhances the beautiful imagery that certain games lack thereof because of certain performance issues on Nintendo Switch. And then last but not least, I want to talk about the Nintendo JoyCon Drift. Yes, there is a lawsuit going on. Yes, Nintendo has admitted that JoyCon Drift is a big problem, but there is no direct solution to it. And the fact that that JoyCon Drift still exists to this day is a testament that Nintendo doesn't really give a damn about what you think. And the fact that I go to a store right now and see that Joy-Cons, a pair of Joy-Cons are worth $80 is utterly ridiculous. And you're better off just buying a Pro controller from a third party company that does not even relate themselves to Nintendo. I cannot believe that the Joy-Con Drift solution doesn't seem to exist. It seems like it that way because a lot of people, when they buy a Nintendo Switch, there's a high chance that your left Joy-Con drifts. I know the very first Joy-Cons that I gotten from my first Nintendo Switch, they started drifting. The left one in particular. And of course, if you guys know what Joy-Con Drift is, there is a big problem with playing video games with this because it basically does not allow you to play games at all. And the fact that Nintendo is still manufacturing these products without even trying to see what's the problem, without even them saying, hey, we got a problem, we need you guys to do this, this, and that, and everything should be good, is atrocious. Yes, Nintendo is giving you the chance to return your Joy-Cons and give them back to you or give you new ones, basically. But the fact that there is no simple solution to that, and the fact that it took them this long to say, hey, we messed up, we're looking into it, is just baffling. Especially a product that is very vital into how you play a video games. Some people do not want Pro controllers, and that's fine. Some people don't want Joy-Cons and they want Pro controllers. That's completely fine. Vice versa and all that. But negligence is a pretty big issue in businesses, particularly Nintendo. With which each controversy, it just seems like Nintendo has not really been so kind to the consumer fan base. I think those are the pretty big topics for me to talk about there. And if you guys have any other interesting topics that you want me to discuss, I appreciate if you guys comment down below. Like and subscribe. I know some people love Nintendo, and don't get me wrong, at the very end, Nintendo has published some of the craziest and most brilliant, innovative games of all time. But the fact that certain practices have put them under such a very dark image makes it seem as if, yes, the games do matter, but the behind the scenes, the way they want to pursue their economic and financial freedom, it's starting to become a lot more sour. And I really hope that Nintendo sees that, hey, the greatest thing they ever done was produce millions of childhoods for a lot of people who grew up on a Nintendo console and their games respectively. But is Nintendo really trying to drive themselves into anti-consumerism? Who knows? Hopefully you guys see that, and hopefully you guys understand that, yes, fan bases are always divided regardless of where you go. But ultimately, to be more informed, to make more informative decisions, it's going to matter, particularly in your wallet, where sometimes you want to buy a game, sometimes you don't want to buy a console. That's your decision. And hopefully you guys understand that if you want to make the best decision, if you want to make an informative opinion, you got to look on both sides of the argument. And that's what this video is here for you guys to talk about. So, what are your guys' opinion on Nintendo? Comment down below. I will be looking into everyone's comments because I am trying to make videos that are just beyond Pokemon, because sometimes I feel like Pokemon can just get like, oh my god, I'm talking about, this whack ass Pokemon for the millionth time or whatever, or Game Freak his ass. There's millions of videos of those like on YouTube. So I appreciate all you guys' support. Like, subscribe for more content. It is your boy Franklin signing out. Peace.